Yes, for this video, I'll be talking about slavery and some of the things that a lot of fake people don't know, and things that I discovered just doing research, and also about Atlantic slavery, the transatlantic slavery, and how it got started. And I'll also be talking about some notable African Americans, Black Americans that came to Africa during that period or shortly after that period, and how they came and the things that they did. As far as slavery, there's a long history of slavery going back thousands of years. People back in the days were a little less cultured. They would just go and kidnap people, make them wives, and sometimes force people to work and stuff. And before the Europeans in Africa, they were like some of the Arabic people that were devoted to enslaving Africans. They would just go and kill people and kidnap and take them and sell them over to some of the Arabian countries and some of the North African countries. And one of the things that you realize is during the time when the Arabs were having a lot of power in the world, they were contending with a lot of European countries. And especially when the Turks, the people that live in Turkey today, when they came on the scene, at that time, the city of Istanbul was still under Christians. When those people took over Istanbul, a lot of those people had to leave as refugees. And during that time, it was becoming a lot difficult for European countries to trade in the Mediterranean Sea. And generally, at that time, the Mediterranean Sea is what connects Europe to the Middle East and Asia. And the country of India, for a very long time, was always known to be the richest country in the world. It's got a lot of tradable goods, things that people want to buy in different countries. A lot of it was coming from India. And in order to get stuff from India, it has to go from the Indian subcontinent through like the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean to Europe. And the Turks did not want European ships on the Mediterranean. So a lot of the European countries at the time were now trying to figure out other ways to access these things. And the country of Spain itself was dominated by Muslims called Moors for 700 years. Now they didn't always colonize the whole country. It was initially the whole of Spain and some parts of France, and then gradually the Spanish Christians started recovering the country. They call it the Reconquista of whatever it's called. So basically, they took over those parts and drove the Muslims out until they got to this place called Grenada. One of the first parts of Spain that got liberated is Portugal. And Portugal is on, I think, the west coast of Spain. It used to all be the same country, but when the Christians were able to liberate that portion of the country, they named it Portugal, and they declared independence and went on their way. And one of the things that the Portuguese did when they got that independence was to become the first seafaring nation in Europe that was going to go to different countries around the world and establish trade links and do different things. One of the things that they were doing is trying to find a way to get to India. And between Europe and India is Africa. And these folks have had some experience with Africans through the Moors and everything. But the sub-Saharan part of Africa has always been a mystery to Europeans, and the Portuguese were the first to get there and actually develop ties and all that things. So when initially when they were on the coast of Africa, they were going over there. Sometimes they would entice some of the Africans on their ships and take them away. Just take them and take them back to Portugal and stuff. Eventually, they were the ones that developed the slave trade, and they established this place called Cape Verde. And there's another island on the Atlantic Ocean that they also colonized. Those islands were largely uninhabited. There was nobody living there. So they would take those people that they took over to those places and, force them to work and do all sorts of things, change their names and stuff like that. And then, of course, back in those days, when you meet with a king, sometimes they will give you, servants. They will exchange people. And sometimes you might end up with a wife too. And some of those guys had African wives. And their children were some of the first actual slave traders. And a lot of those people were living in this Cape Verde. There were a couple of islands near Africa where they established some of these places, had plantations and stuff there. And many of the people that ran those places were some of the Portuguese and their mixed children. And these folks were some of the pioneers of the Atlantic slave trade, because the Portuguese ended up also discovering Brazil. Even with Spain, Christopher Columbus used to live in Portugal, and he was married to a rich Portuguese lady that came from a rich family, and he also followed some of the Portuguese sailors to Africa, and so he learned a lot of those things from the Portuguese. And when he actually got a chance to talk to the King and Queen of Spain, he met them the same year that they drove the last Islamic kings away from Spain, and he met them at the same palace, the king's residence that used to belong to the Muslim king. That's where Christopher Columbus met with the King and Queen of Spain, and he had to wait until that war was over before he was able to actually get an audience with them, and they were the ones that sponsored his trip to America. Before then, he had met with several other kings that didn't want to invest money in that. So eventually, he met with the King and Queen of Spain, and they sent him on his way. So you got the Spanish and Christopher Columbus that actually lived in Portugal, even though he was originally from Italy. So these are some of the people that were in the beginning, and a lot of those folks just followed the same steps with Portugal and learned from them, and they carried on these things. The other thing that it's important to note is that those same Muslims that I was talking about in Islam, the idea is that if you are a Muslim, anywhere that is not a Muslim is not your brother. So a lot of the Muslim people, the Moors, the Arabs, and some of their mixed children also were involved in the slave trade, because they saw any of the Africans that were not Muslim as someone that, according to their religion, it is allowed for them to enslave and do anything you want to do against them. So they were always pioneering a lot of wars against some of the native African tribes and enslaving a lot of them. Of course, the Africans usually fight back too. And some of those folks, unfortunately, if the Africans capture them, they would sell them too. And these are some of the things that happen. And then the other African people that are not Muslims, with the help of some of those Portuguese traders that I talked about, some of the mixed children that they had, some of those folks were also enticed into the slave trade. And a lot of times you had some of these African kings fighting with other African kings, and in the middle of that, if they catch like let's say some soldiers surrender and they become prisoners of war, a lot of times those people may be sold into slavery. And a lot of times people doing that also do it in order to get ammunition and all of those things. And the other thing you have to remember is, even amongst the Africans themselves, often in a lot of the African tribes, the ones that tend to fight each other, there is a lot of otherness involved. Where if you're not from my tribe, I don't really see you as being a brother or someone that I need to be worried about what happens to that person. And what ended up happening is, I don't think there's any particular tribe in West Africa that did not end up as a victim of this Atlantic slave trade. Even the people that you might consider as being more inclined to be the ones going on the slave raids. I'll tell you an example of a tribe called the Fulanis, where in Nigeria, for example, they did a lot of slave raiding, but you'll find out there were a lot of Fulanis that ended up in slavery as well. And they might have been captured while trying to enslave other people and end up in the same situation. In fact, there was a case of some Fulani prince that ended up in the US. I think his name is Abdul Rahman, that ended up getting freed when the king of Morocco got involved. I don't know how they got to petition the king of Morocco, and that king ended up writing to like the American president, and they ended up freeing this guy, and he was able to return to Africa. So that's that about the origin of slavery. So what am I trying to say? There's a lot of nuance involved. A lot of time people like to cast blame, especially in Africa or against some of the African people, but it's a little bit more complicated when you are talking about Arabs, for example. You might say Africans, but if someone is Arabic, they might be living in Africa, but you can't really compare them to the native African people. And then you also have the tribal issue over there, and the fact that a lot of the ideas that we have today, nationalist ideas, Pan-Africanism and all that, were not that important back in those days. A lot of people were just thinking of their own kingdom, their own tribe, and so forth, and they didn't really view their actions through the lens of, oh, this thing that we are doing will help the white man against us. And eventually, a lot of towns and communities in Africa was affected by that slave trade. Often in some of the towns, most of the men have been taken away as slaves, and the women and the children were not able to develop those places as a result, and they fall into poverty. And there's a lot of places where the people had to run away and move away from the town that they used to live in, and leave some of their property and farms behind in order to escape slavery. And if you have a woman with 5 children and a husband that gets like 4 of the kids stolen into slavery, and the husband killed, and one of the sons killed, how is that woman, how is she responsible for what happened to her? She's not. So what am I trying to say? There is victims everywhere, and it's always better to actually learn the actual information, the real story. There's a lot of generalizations that I see, and let me give you an example. There are African tribes in all parts of Africa that had no involvement in the Atlantic slave trade. So if we say, oh, the Africans did this or that, what about those people that their countries, they don't have anybody in slavery over there? What about them? How do we differentiate who did what, and then those same Portuguese folks that were not really Portuguese, they're like mixture. Are they really? Can you really say honestly that they are supposed to have the same ideals as the average African or the Arab intermediaries? How do we say they are supposed to be to behave like Africans when they are not necessarily Africans? So there's a lot going on there. And the second part of my video is about some of the activities of people that lived in America, that came from Africa, that came back. And some of the ones that I'll talk about is Sierra Leone and Liberia. So these two countries, they are in Africa, but they got their start by people that came from England, Canada, and the US that were brought back to the African continent to start these two countries. And I'm always surprised to find that a lot of people are not familiar with that history, and they just look at Liberia and Sierra Leone just like any other African countries, not knowing that a lot of these folks, many of them were some of the folks that helped the British during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, and gained their freedom from that. So some of the people that were involved in this. I also read about some African Americans, Black Americans, that helped the British, and they were settled in one of the countries in the Caribbean. I don't know if it's Trinidad or Suriname, one of those places where they were known as colonial marines. Now that's not in Africa. Another thing that I'll mention is during colonialism, some of the things that I found out was that the actual war between the Europeans and the Africans, a lot of times, involved people that, like for example, I've talked about when the Europeans will go and meet up with some of the kings, and the kings will give them somebody to help them and be their servants and stuff. A lot of times they will train those folks to be military men, and then they take them to other places to fight. They took people like that in different parts of Africa, and some of those people from the Caribbean, to be involved in some of these wars. And another thing that I think is important to mention is in Nigeria, for example, one of the prominent anti-slavery activists that I learned about growing up, his name is Thomas Birch Freeman. I grew up to realize that he's actually a Black American, and that is something that many people are now familiar with. Another person that I learned about, his name is Colonel Young. He's one of the first Black colonels in the U.S. military, and he was born, back in the slavery times, and ended up going to West Point and did a lot of good things. He also was one of those people that came to Africa as military, on the military assignments, and he actually died in Nigeria in some kind of what they call a reconnaissance project. I think he got sick and ended up dying. And there's another person that I'm thinking about that I was going to mention. Let's see. I think that's it. Yes, and other than just Black Americans and people from the English-speaking countries, there were other people like people from Cuba. There's another group of people like from Brazil, where they had a slave revolt over there, and they called those people the Malay Revolt. And these people were a group of Yoruba Muslims that ended up causing a revolt over there in Brazil. I don't know if they ended up killing a bunch of people, but eventually they were arrested. And when they found out that a lot of the leaders were from this Yoruba part of Nigeria, they decided to kill the leaders, and then the rest of the people that they felt may have similar background or religion, for example, because all those people were Muslim, they shipped them back to Nigeria. And then even after slavery was ended in Brazil, a lot of Brazilian people that remember where they came from went back to Nigeria as well. And the third group of people are what they call recaptured slaves. So these are people that after the British outlawed the slave trade, the British will roam around on the seas and be looking for slave ships. And they would let some of the slave ships go. Like if it was an American ship, they would let it go. But if it was not an American ship, they would capture the slave ship and take all the people that are on that slave ship to Sierra Leone, a place called Freetown. And over there, they would train those people, some of them in the military, some to be, clerks or priests and stuff like that. And a lot of those people also went back to their country of origin, including Nigeria. And some of the first educated class of people were these returning slaves and recaptured people that may not even have made it to the New World in the first place. So I always thought that this story is very deep, and there is a lot to learn from these stories, and I think it's always good for all of us to actually go deep and learn the truth about these things, because what happened those times is affecting us today, and a lot of times we don't really know how to explain or see things if we don't know the background. So I always thought it's important, and I do my best to do some of this research, and whatever I think is important to share, I'll do what I can. So thank you guys for watching this video.